Alexander Chen stood in front of his floor-length mirror, adjusting his simple cotton shirt for the third time that morning. At 32, he had everything most people dreamed of. A successful tech company worth millions, 3 luxury cars sitting in his garage, and a penthouse overlooking the city. Yet something was missing, and that something had always been genuine love. Growing up in a wealthy family, Alex had learned early on that people could be deceiving. He had watched his older sister's heart get broken by a man who disappeared the moment their father's company faced temporary financial troubles. Since then, he had guarded his heart carefully, never revealing his true financial status to anyone he dated. On this particular autumn morning, Alex decided to skip his usual driver and expensive car. Instead, he grabbed the keys to an old Honda Civic he kept specifically for his ordinary guy persona. The car had a few dents and the paint was fading, but it served its purpose perfectly. He drove to Downtown Cup, a cozy coffee shop he had discovered while researching places where regular people hung out. As he pushed open the glass door, the warm aroma of freshly ground coffee beans welcomed him. The place was busy with the morning rush, and that's when he first saw her. Sarah Mitchell stood behind the counter, her honey-brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, and a genuine smile lighting up her face as she served customers. What caught Alex's attention wasn't her obvious beauty, though she was certainly beautiful, but the way she remembered every regular customer's name and asked about their families with sincere interest. "Good morning. What can I get you today?" Sarah's voice was warm and friendly when Alex reached the counter. Her name tag was slightly crooked, and there was a small coffee stain on her green apron, but her eyes sparkled with genuine happiness. "Just a regular black coffee, please," Alex replied, intentionally making his voice a bit nervous. He had perfected this act over the years, a slightly awkward worker who lived paycheck to paycheck. Sarah nodded and started preparing his coffee. "New to the area? I haven't seen you here before." "Just changed jobs," Alex explained, sticking to his prepared story. "I work at the IT department of Miller & Sons now." It wasn't entirely a lie. His company had recently acquired Miller & Sons, though he owned it rather than worked there. As Sarah handed him his coffee, their fingers brushed briefly. "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Sarah, and I promise we make the best coffee in town." She laughed, and something about that sound made Alex's carefully constructed walls shake a little. Over the next few weeks, Alex found himself returning to Downtown Cup every morning. He learned that Sarah was 28, had put herself through college working multiple jobs, and now worked at the coffee shop while pursuing her dream of opening a small bookstore. She never complained about her circumstances, instead focusing on the joy she found in simple things, like the perfect cup of coffee or a good book. Their conversations grew longer, and Alex found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone else: his fears, his dreams, carefully edited to match his supposed income, and his hope of finding someone who would love him for who he was, not what he had. One rainy evening, as Sarah was closing up the shop, Alex finally gathered the courage to ask her out. To his surprise and delight, she suggested they grab pizza from the small place around the corner. "It's not fancy," she said with a slight blush, "but they make the best margarita in town." Sitting in the cramped pizzeria, watching Sarah laugh at his terrible jokes and passionately discuss her favorite books, Alex felt something he hadn't experienced before: the desire to be completely honest with someone. But fear held him back. He had seen too many people change when they discovered wealth, and Sarah's genuine nature was too precious to risk. That night, as Alex drove home in his old Honda, passing by his actual penthouse to park at the modest apartment he maintained for appearances, he made a decision. He would continue this charade a little longer, just until he was absolutely sure. After all, he thought, if Sarah could love him as a simple worker living paycheck to paycheck, then perhaps she could be the one person who would love him for who he truly was, not for his bank account. Little did Alex know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would test not only Sarah's love, but also his own beliefs about trust and authenticity. Over the next few months, Alex and Sarah's relationship blossomed in the most ordinary yet beautiful ways. They spent weekends exploring free museums, having picnics in the park, and watching street performers in the city square. Sarah never complained about their modest dates or showed any interest in expensive things, which only made Alex fall harder for her. Living his double life was becoming increasingly challenging for Alex. Every morning, he would leave his luxury penthouse, drive to his modest apartment, change into simple clothes, and then meet Sarah in his old Honda. His closest friend and business partner, Michael, constantly warned him about the complications of his deception. "You're digging yourself into a deeper hole every day," Michael said during one of their private meetings at the office. "What happens when she finds out you own the building her coffee shop is in?" Alex ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous habit he'd developed since starting this charade. I know, but you should see how different she is, Mike. Last week, she spent her tip money buying coffee for a homeless man who sits outside the shop." One particularly memorable evening, Sarah invited Alex to her small studio apartment for a home-cooked dinner. The place was tiny, with mismatched furniture and walls covered in postcards and book quotes, but it felt more like a home than his expensive penthouse ever had. Sarah had prepared a simple pasta dish, apologizing that she couldn't afford better ingredients. "I'm not much of a cook," she admitted, nervously tucking her hair behind her ear, "but I wanted to do something special for our 3-month anniversary." Alex's heart clenched with guilt as he watched her serve the meal on chipped plates. Here was someone who gave everything she had, while he pretended to be someone he wasn't. The pasta was slightly overcooked, but Alex thought it was the best meal he'd ever had. During dinner, Sarah shared her dreams of opening a bookstore cafe. "I know it's probably impossible with my savings," she said, looking down at her plate, "but maybe someday. I've already picked out a name, Stories and Stems." Alex had to stop himself from offering to buy her a store right then and there. Instead, he reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I believe in you. You'll make it happen." Their relationship faced its first real test when Sarah's car broke down. The repair costs were more than she could afford, and Alex struggled watching her take extra shifts to save money. He had millions in his bank account but maintained his act of being equally broke, only able to offer help with bus schedules and occasional rides. One day, while dropping Sarah off at work, she kissed him and said, "You know what I love about us? We might not have much, but we have each other. Some of my customers come in with designer bags and expensive watches, but they never seem happy. I'd rather have our simple life any day." Her words hit Alex hard. That evening, he sat in his real home, surrounded by luxury, feeling more conflicted than ever. On his coffee table lay an invitation to an important business gala where he would be receiving an award for Entrepreneur of the Year. He had already told Sarah he would be out of town that weekend for a conference. The lies were piling up, and Alex knew he needed to make a decision soon. But every time he thought about revealing the truth, he remembered his sister's experience and the countless gold diggers he'd encountered over the years. That night, Sarah called him excited about finding a rare book at a thrift store. "It cost me my lunch money for the week," she laughed, "but it was worth it. Want to come over and read it together? I'll make that awful instant coffee you pretend to like." As Alex agreed and headed out to his decoy apartment to change into his normal clothes, he couldn't help but smile. Sarah had somehow turned even his fake modest life into something precious and real. But in the back of his mind, a plan was forming. He needed to be absolutely sure about Sarah's feelings before he revealed everything. And as their 6-month anniversary approached, he thought he knew exactly how to test her love, though he never imagined how his plan would spiral into something that would shock everyone, including himself. After 6 months of dating, Alex knew he wanted to spend his life with Sarah. Her kindness, genuine nature, and love for simple pleasures had completely captured his heart. However, the weight of his deception grew heavier each day, especially when he started thinking about proposing. One rainy Sunday afternoon, while Sarah was working her shift at Downtown Cup, Alex walked in with a serious look on his face. He ordered his usual black coffee and waited until the morning rush slowed down. "Sarah," he called her over softly, "can we talk for a minute?" His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out a small, worn velvet box from his jacket pocket. It contained his grandmother's engagement ring, a modest gold band with a tiny diamond that fit perfectly with his supposed financial situation. Sarah's eyes widened as she saw the box. "Take your break now, honey," her manager called out, having noticed what was happening. Other customers in the coffee shop fell silent, watching the scene unfold. "I know this isn't much," Alex began, his voice trembling with genuine emotion despite the calculated simplicity of the ring. "I saved up for 3 months to get the box fixed up. The ring was my grandmother's, and," he paused, seeing tears forming in Sarah's eyes. Before he could continue with his prepared speech, Sarah threw her arms around him, nearly knocking over a nearby chair. "Yes," she exclaimed, not even waiting for the question. 1,000 times yes. The coffee shop erupted in applause. Customers who had watched their romance bloom over daily coffee orders cheered and took pictures. Sarah's manager brought out complimentary muffins for everyone to celebrate. That evening, as they sat in Sarah's tiny apartment celebrating with cheap champagne, Alex felt both elated and troubled. He watched Sarah admiring the simple ring on her finger, treating it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "You know," she said softly, "this ring means more to me than any expensive diamond could. It has history, love, and it's from you." Her words, meant to be comforting, only increased Alex's guilt. The next day, Alex met with Michael at their company's headquarters, entering through the secret parking garage to avoid being seen. "I proposed," he announced, pacing around his luxurious office. Michael nearly spilled his premium coffee. "You did what? Please tell me you at least told her the truth first." "I'm going to," Alex defended himself, "but I need to be completely sure. I have a plan." He explained his idea to Michael. He would come to the wedding in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, looking even more financially strained than usual. If Sarah still married him looking like that, in front of all their guests, he would know her love was genuine. Michael shook his head in disbelief. "This is going too far, Alex. She's agreed to marry a man who works in it. That should be enough proof." But Alex couldn't let go of his fears. As wedding preparations began, he watched Sarah plan everything on a tight budget. She chose a small community church, made her own decorations, and even planned to wear her mother's restored wedding dress. "We don't need anything fancy," she would say, crafting centerpieces from mason jars and wildflowers. "As long as we're together, it will be perfect." Each time she said something like this, Alex's resolve to test her strengthened. He had seen too many people change when money entered the picture. His sister's experience haunted him. Her fiancé had seemed genuine too, until he wasn't. 3 weeks before the wedding, Alex purchased the suit for his final test, an ill-fitting, polyester blend in an unflattering brown color from a discount store. Looking at himself in the store's mirror, even he had to admit he looked terrible in it. That night, Sarah called him excited about finding affordable fairy lights for the reception. "Everything's coming together perfectly," she said happily. "I can't wait to be your wife." Alex closed his eyes, listening to her joyful voice. In 3 weeks, he would either have everything he ever wanted or lose it all. As he hung up the phone, he wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life with this test, but his fears wouldn't let him back down. Little did he know that his wedding day would unfold in ways he never expected, and Sarah's reaction would leave everyone, including him, completely speechless. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect spring weather. At his penthouse, Alex stood staring at 2 suits laid out on his bed, an expensive designer suit he'd originally planned to reveal himself in, and the cheap, ill-fitting brown polyester suit he'd bought for his test. His hand hovered over the designer suit for a moment before he firmly grabbed the brown one. As he put it on, he could hear his sister Alina's words from their argument the previous night. "You're being cruel," she had said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Sarah's spent months planning this wedding on a tight budget, making everything by hand, and you're going to humiliate her on her wedding day." Alex adjusted the 2 short sleeves of the brown suit in his mirror. The pants were slightly too wide, the jacket pulled awkwardly across his shoulders, and the color made his skin look sallow. He had even bought scuffed shoes from a thrift store to complete the look. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from Michael and Alina, begging him to reconsider. He turned it off. Looking at his reflection one final time, he messed up his hair slightly and grabbed the keys to his old Honda. At the small community church, guests were already arriving. Alex watched from his car as Sarah's college friends entered, carrying homemade bouquets. Some of his relatives, who knew his true identity, shot him disapproving looks as they walked past his parked Honda. Inside the church's small preparation room, Alex could hear the excited chatter of guests. Many were whispering about his appearance. He caught fragments of conversations. Is he really wearing that to his own wedding? Poor Sarah, maybe he lost his job. I heard he couldn't even afford a proper suit. His hands started to shake as he realized the magnitude of what he was doing. The church door opened, and Michael walked in, looking sharp in his groomsman's suit. "It's not too late," Michael whispered urgently. I brought your other suit in my car. This is madness, Alex. You're risking everything. Alex shook his head stubbornly. I need to know, Mike. I need to be sure. The wedding music started playing on the old church piano. Alex took his position at the altar, aware of the murmurs and stares from the guests. Some looked embarrassed for him, others seemed angry, and a few were clearly pitying him. Sarah's father appeared at the church entrance, and the whispers died down. Everyone stood, turning toward the door, waiting for the bride. Alex's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear the music. And then she appeared. Sarah stood in the doorway, a vision in her mother's restored wedding dress. She had spent weeks carefully mending it, adding delicate lace details by hand. Her bouquet was made of wildflowers she'd picked herself that morning. She looked radiant, perfect, until she saw Alex. The entire church held its breath as Sarah's steps faltered slightly. Her eyes widened as she took in his appearance, the ill-fitting brown suit, the scuffed shoes, the messy hair. For a moment that felt like eternity, she stood frozen in the middle of the aisle. Alex felt cold sweat running down his back. This was the moment of truth. Would she turn and run? Would she be humiliated? Angry? He watched as various emotions flickered across her face. Then something unexpected happened. Sarah handed her bouquet to her surprise bridesmaid and walked directly to Alex. The guests watched in shocked silence as she reached up and gently straightened his crooked tie. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. She touched his cheek softly and whispered something that only he could hear. The look in her eyes was pure love, without a trace of embarrassment or disappointment. Alex felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. In that moment, seeing the unconditional love in Sarah's eyes, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. This woman, who had never cared about material things, who had loved him through every moment of their relationship, deserved better than this test. But before he could speak, before he could confess everything and beg for forgiveness, Sarah said something that would change everything. Her words, spoken loudly enough for the front rows to hear, would send ripples of shock through the entire congregation and force Alex to confront the true meaning of love and trust. Standing before Alex in her carefully restored wedding dress, Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him in his shabby brown suit. The church remained silent, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see how this uncomfortable situation would unfold. You could wear a paper bag, Sarah said loudly enough for the front rows to hear, and I'd still marry you because I love you, not what you wear. Her voice cracked with emotion as she continued. But I know you, Alex, and something's wrong. This isn't like you at all. Alex felt his carefully planned test crumbling around him. He hadn't expected her to be so perceptive, to see through his act to the pain beneath. Sarah's hands were trembling as she straightened his collar again, but her eyes never left his face. For weeks, you've been distant, she said softly, now speaking just to him. I thought maybe you were having second thoughts about us, about marrying someone who can barely afford to buy new shoes. But that's not it, is it? The minister cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to proceed with the ceremony. Sarah's father had stepped forward, confusion and concern evident on his face. The wedding guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Alex opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah wasn't finished. Last week, I saw you getting into a different car, an expensive one. I followed you because I was worried you were in some kind of trouble. She took a deep breath. I saw where you really live, Alex. The blood drained from Alex's face. Michael, standing nearby, muttered a quiet, "Oh God," under his breath. Elena, sitting in the front row, covered her face with her hands. I did some research after that, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. It wasn't hard to find out who you really are. Alexander Chen, CEO of Tech Future Industries, owner of half the buildings downtown, including the one where my coffee shop is located. Gasps echoed through the church. Those who hadn't known Alex's true identity looked shocked, while those who had known looked increasingly uncomfortable. I waited for you to tell me the truth, Sarah said, her eyes never leaving his face. I thought maybe you would before the wedding. Then I saw you arrive today in this suit, and I finally understood. She reached up and touched his cheek gently. You were testing me. Alex felt shame wash over him in waves. His carefully constructed plan, which had seemed so logical and necessary just hours ago, now felt cruel and foolish. But Sarah wasn't angry. Instead, she was looking at him with a mixture of love and sadness that made his heart ache. "The man I fell in love with," she continued, her voice carrying clearly through the silent church, "isn't defined by his bank account or his clothes. He's the person who brings coffee to the elderly man who sits in the park every morning. He's the one who helped my coworker move apartments without being asked. He's the one who reads to children at the library every Saturday." Tears were now flowing freely down Sarah's face, but she was smiling. "That's who you are, Alex. Not your money, not your companies, and certainly not this suit you're wearing to test my love." The church was completely silent now, every person hanging on Sarah's words. Alex felt tears forming in his own eyes, his carefully constructed walls completely shattered by her understanding and love. "So yes," Sarah said, raising her voice slightly, "I'll marry you today. I'll marry you in that horrible suit because I love you. But first, I need you to promise me something." Alex found his voice at last, though it was barely more than a whisper. "Anything. Promise me no more tests, no more lies, just us, being completely honest with each other for the rest of our lives." The sincerity in her voice, the love in her eyes, and the wisdom of her words hit Alex like a physical force. He realized that while he had been testing her love, she had been proving it all along, not through grand gestures or reactions to tests, but through the simple, everyday acts of love that had made him fall for her in the first place. What happened next would leave everyone in the church absolutely stunned, as Alex made a decision that would change everything about this wedding day. Overwhelmed by Sarah's words and the depth of her understanding, Alex took both her hands in his. The cheap brown suit suddenly felt like armor he needed to shed. Looking into her eyes, he made a decision that would transform their wedding day. "You're right about everything," he said, his voice carrying through the hushed church. "I've been a fool, and I need to make this right." He turned to face their guests, still holding Sarah's hands. "I owe everyone here an explanation, but most of all, I owe one to this amazing woman." Alex looked at Michael, who immediately understood and hurried out to his car to retrieve the other suit. Turning back to Sarah, Alex continued speaking, his voice thick with emotion. "When I first met you, I was so scared of people loving me for my money that I created this entire fake life. The modest apartment, the old car, the job. It was all a lie." He swallowed hard, but something unexpected happened. "In trying to live this simple life with you, I found real happiness for the first time." Sarah squeezed his hands encouragingly as he spoke. Her father had settled back into his seat, a look of understanding slowly replacing his earlier confusion. "Every morning, getting coffee from you, watching you remember everyone's names and stories, seeing how you treated everyone with kindness regardless of their status, I fell in love with your heart," Alex continued. "But instead of trusting in that love, I kept testing it." Michael returned with a garment bag, and Alex took a deep breath. "I'd like to take a short break in the ceremony," he announced to their guests. "I need to change into the suit I should have worn today, not because it's expensive, but because it represents me being honest about who I am." Sarah's smile brightened. "Only if you let me help you fix your hair too," she teased, drawing gentle laughter from the guests. As Alex headed to the preparation room with Michael, Sarah turned to address the guests herself. "While we're waiting," she said with remarkable poise, "I'd like to share something with all of you. Love isn't about bank accounts or status. It's about finding someone who brings out the best in you, who makes you want to be better." In the preparation room, Alex quickly changed into his proper suit, a perfectly tailored charcoal gray ensemble that reflected his true self. As he dressed, he could hear Sarah's voice continuing to address their guests. "When I discovered Alex's secret," her voice carried through the door, "I wasn't angry about his wealth. I was sad that he felt he couldn't trust me with the truth, but I understood his fears because I've seen how people change around money." Alex paused in straightening his tie, moved by her words. Michael helped him style his hair properly, both men listening to Sarah's speech. "The man I fell in love with showed me what real wealth is," Sarah was saying. "It's in the way he treats others, the kindness he shows, and the love he gives. That's what I'm marrying today. Not his bank account, not his status, but his heart." When Alex emerged from the preparation room, looking like the successful businessman he truly was, a collective gasp went through the church, but he only had eyes for Sarah, who beamed at him with pure joy. Taking his place beside her again, Alex pulled a small box from his new suit pocket. "There's one more thing I need to make right," he said softly. Opening the box, he revealed a stunning diamond ring, the one he'd always wanted to give her. Would you wear this along with my grandmother's ring? Not because it's expensive, but because it represents my promise to always be honest with you from this day forward. Sarah looked at the ring, then back at Alex's face. The moment hung in the air as everyone waited for her response. Her answer would not only determine the course of their wedding day, but would show everyone present the true meaning of unconditional love. The next few minutes would become the most talked about moment of their wedding, as Sarah's response would touch everyone's hearts and prove that true love sees beyond all facades. Sarah looked at the diamond ring sparkling in Alex's hand, then at the simple gold band already on her finger. The church remained silent, everyone waiting for her response. With tears in her eyes and a gentle smile on her face, she made a decision that would touch everyone's hearts. This morning, she began, her voice clear and steady, I was ready to marry you in that awful brown suit because I love who you are, not what you own. She touched the simple gold band on her finger. This ring represents that love, pure, honest, and unconditional. I want to keep wearing it exactly as it is. Alex's hand holding the diamond ring trembled slightly, but Sarah wasn't finished. She placed her hand over his, closing the ring box gently. Keep this beautiful diamond, she said softly. Maybe we can save it for our 5th anniversary, when we built our trust completely. For today, I want to marry you with the ring that represents how our love began, simple, genuine, and real. Murmurs of admiration rippled through the church. Alex felt tears forming in his eyes, overwhelmed by the wisdom and love in Sarah's decision. Even his sister Elena was openly crying in the front row. But, Sarah added with a mischievous smile, I will accept one wedding gift from you. She turned to face their guests. My fiancé here owns the building where I work, and I'd like to use part of it to open my bookstore cafe, Stories and Stems. Not because he's giving it to me, but because I'm going to rent it fairly and build it myself. Alex couldn't help but laugh through his tears. You'll get the family discount, he said, drawing chuckles from the guests. The minister stepped forward, smiling warmly. Shall we proceed with the ceremony? I believe we've all witnessed something extraordinary today, a love that transcends material wealth and stands firmly on the foundation of truth. As they took their positions at the altar, Sarah's father came forward to adjust her veil. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, I've never been prouder of you, sweetheart. You've taught us all something about love today. The ceremony began anew, but this time it was different. The atmosphere in the church had transformed from one of tension and uncertainty to one of joy and genuine celebration. Every guest could feel the authentic love between the couple. When it came time for their vows, Alex spoke first, his voice strong and clear. Sarah, you've shown me that real love isn't about tests or trials. It's about acceptance, understanding, and truth. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the trust you've shown me today. Sarah squeezed his hands as she began her vows. Alex, you tried to test my love, but you ended up proving yours. I promise to always remind you that your worth isn't in your wallet but in your heart. And I promise to love you through whatever life brings us, whether we're drinking premium coffee or instant coffee in my tiny apartment. As they exchanged rings, keeping the simple gold bands they'd originally chosen, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Even Michael, who had witnessed Alex's journey from the beginning, was discreetly wiping away tears. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and as they shared their first kiss as a married couple, the church erupted in applause. This wasn't just a celebration of their marriage. It was a celebration of genuine love triumphing over fear and pretense. As they turned to face their guests, Sarah leaned close to Alex and whispered, By the way, you still owe me an explanation about why you drive that terrible Honda when you own a fleet of luxury cars. Alex laughed, pulling her close. I'll tell you everything on our honeymoon, which, by the way, isn't going to be the backpacking trip I originally planned. Sarah playfully hit his arm. As long as you promise to buy me coffee every morning, I don't care where we go. As they walked down the aisle together, their guests throwing rose petals, everyone could see that this was just the beginning of their story. But the final surprise of the day was yet to come, a revelation that would prove that Sarah had one last lesson to teach Alex about love, trust, and the true meaning of wealth. At the reception, held in the church's beautifully decorated garden, Alex and Sarah shared their first dance under strings of the fairy lights she had carefully chosen. The simple decorations she had crafted by hand seemed to shine even more beautifully now that all pretenses had been stripped away. As they swayed to the music, Sarah looked up at her new husband with a mischievous glint in her eye. "I have a confession to make," she said softly, so only he could hear. Alex raised an eyebrow, wondering what else could possibly surprise him today. Sarah led him to a quiet corner of the garden, away from their celebrating guests. "Remember all those times I talked about struggling to save money for my bookstore?" she asked, reaching into a hidden pocket in her wedding dress. She pulled out a folded bank statement. "I wasn't entirely honest either." Alex's eyes widened as he looked at the paper. The statement showed a savings account with a substantial balance, enough to open a small business comfortably. "I've been saving since college," Sarah explained, watching his reaction carefully. "I could have opened Stories and Stems months ago, but I was waiting for the right moment and location." She smiled softly. "I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it on my own." Alex stared at her in amazement, then burst out laughing. "So while I was pretending to be poor to test your love, I was living simply by choice, not necessity," Sarah finished, joining his laughter. "I wanted to build something of my own, not rely on anyone else's money. I guess we both had our own kinds of pride to overcome." Their laughter drew the attention of nearby guests, and soon Michael came over to investigate. When they explained the situation, he doubled over with laughter. "You two deserve each other," he managed to say between chuckles. "Both hiding your resources, both trying to prove something." The news spread quickly through the reception, adding another layer of joy and amusement to the celebration. Sarah's father raised his glass in a toast. "To my daughter and son-in-law, who tried so hard to prove their love was real that they both ended up proving it in ways they never expected." Elena came up to hug them both. "This is better than any reality TV show," she said, wiping away tears of laughter. "You two were meant for each other." As the evening progressed, Alex and Sarah shared their plans with their guests. They would combine their resources, her savings and his business expertise, to create not just one bookstore cafe, but a chain of Stories and Stems across the city, each one maintaining the cozy, personal atmosphere Sarah had always dreamed of. "But I'm still going to work the morning shift at Downtown Cup sometimes," Sarah insisted. "That's where our story began, and I never want to forget that." Alex wrapped his arms around her. "And I'll still come in every morning for my black coffee," he promised. "Though maybe now I'll drive a slightly better car." As the reception drew to a close, the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon, which was indeed no longer going to be a backpacking trip, but rather a luxury tour of European bookstores and cafes, combining both their passions. Before they left, Sarah gathered everyone's attention one last time. "Today taught us all something important," she said, holding Alex's hand tightly. "Love isn't about what you have or don't have. It's about being true to yourself and to each other." Alex squeezed her hand. "And sometimes," he added, "the person you're trying to test ends up teaching you the most important lesson of all." As they drove away in Alex's actual car, a modest but elegant sedan, as they had both learned to appreciate the middle ground, their guests could see them laughing together, probably already planning their future adventures. The story of their wedding day would be told for years to come, not just for its dramatic revelations, but for the profound lessons it taught about love, trust, and the importance of being genuine. And every morning, without fail, the CEO of Tech Future Industries could be found at Downtown Cup, getting his black coffee from his wife, who still remembered every regular customer's name and treated everyone with the same genuine warmth that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. Their love story proved that the greatest wealth isn't found in bank accounts or business empires, but in the genuine connection between two hearts brave enough to be true to themselves and each other.